Good afternoon or good morning, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Zsuzsanna Bég. I'm a program officer at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and I'm managing the Rethink CE Fellowship of our Transatlantic Trusts. I'm happy to welcome you here today for a discussion of a research paper written by one of our excellent Rethink CE fellows, Lila Eredic, who explored how the war in Ukraine affects Roma refugees and how European member states are responding to the challenge that marginalized groups like the Roma minority face when fleeing their countries. As you surely know, the war in Ukraine has resulted in one of the biggest exoduses in Europe in recent history. Over 7 million people have fled the country already, and over the past 2 years, we have seen unprecedented response from international organizations, member states, civil society across the European Union. But also this experience of the past by now 2.5, nearly 3 years even, show some groups do not get adequate support when entering their host countries, and especially those groups that have been historically marginalized even in their home countries face disproportionate difficulties when entering their temporary host countries. They are in the situation of heightened vulnerability, and policy responses do not properly address their needs. They are facing situations which are very often much more difficult than other refugee community situations. They are facing, on top of the precarities, additional discrimination, and often fall between the cracks of the existing system. So Vila, over the past year, have explored how especially member states, but also the European Union, respond and could respond better to the needs of such communities, focusing specifically on Roma refugees from Ukraine. And today we have the pleasure to discuss the topic with two distinguished experts, Elżbieta Mirga-Wójtowicz from the University of Warsaw's Center for Migration Research, and Dejan Markovic, who is the coordinator for Ukraine from the Ergo network. The three of them will give us an insight into the situation of Roma refugees and how policymakers could improve on their responses towards these needs. And this also an occasion that concludes Lila's fellowship with us at the German Marshall Fund. This marks the end of her 1-year Rethink CE fellowship with us. So before we dive into, just give me 1 more minute to explain briefly what this Rethink CE fellowship is that I keep on mentioning. This is our 1-year non-residential fellowship for young analyst researchers from Central and Eastern Europe, the Western Balkans, and the Eastern Partnership countries. And in the framework of this program, these fellows have the opportunity to pursue policy-oriented research projects, focusing on issues that they see most relevant and most pressing for the countries they are coming from, addressing challenges the broader regions face. With this fellowship, we seek to empower young analyst researchers and also raise the visibility of European, Central and Eastern European voices across the wider European community, as well as the transatlantic space. The fellowship will also open a new call in the beginning of next year. So if there are people among you who would be interested, I would be very much encouraging you to keep an eye on our website, and I will share the link in the comments here and on our recording in the show notes. Please be aware that today's session is recorded, and we will post it later on our YouTube channel. Nonetheless, I would encourage you to stay with us as long as possible. Please also note that we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, comments throughout the discussion, please feel free to just write them in the chat or in the Q&A box. And now, without any further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Lila, who will present her research findings from her policy project to you. Lila, the floor is yours, and feel free to share yours.
Thank you, Zsuzsanna. Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in my discussion. So today, as Zsuzsanna also said, I will present my research on the marginalization of Roma refugees, focusing on their experiences in Poland and Hungary. And I will share my screen in a minute. I hope it works well. Okay, now you should be able to see my screen in a full size, right? My PPT.
Not yet full size.
Not yet full size. Interesting.
But we do see your side. Okay. Is it not full size? Because my computer is.
Okay, cool. So in the last, as you may already know, in the last almost 3 years, there have been growing evidence that Roma refugees fleeing from Ukraine have not benefited equally from EU's unprecedented solidarity and the protection realized under the Temporary Protection Directive. All across EU states, they have faced barriers related to legal status, housing, employment, education, and welfare benefits. And by focusing on Roma refugee situation in Hungary and Poland, the goal of this paper is to highlight that the experiences of Roma refugees shows the intersection of deep-rooted racialized exclusion, systemic neglect, and significant gaps in policy responses, both at the regional and the national level. So the data that I rely on for my analysis, I rely on interviews I conducted with stakeholders both in Poland and Hungary, who are involved in the situation of refugees. And besides, I rely on my own experiences and data that I gathered at Roma Veritas Foundation throughout the last 3 years, which involved several thousands of interviews with Roma refugees themselves, and further focus groups and stakeholder interviews on the ground. So to understand the exclusionary processes emerging under the last 3 years, it is important to examine first the situation from which Roma refugees themselves arrived. Similarly to Roma communities in other European countries, Roma have faced multiple forms of marginalization in all spheres of life in Ukraine. While official estimates suggest there are around 50,000 Roma in Ukraine, CSOs estimated the number to be between 200,000 and 400,000. And while Roma in central parts of Ukraine might have better living conditions, those in the peripheral areas face extreme segregation, overcrowded housing, and limited access to education and employment. And many Roma engage in low-paid, insecure labor migration. Due to this, they mainly migrate to Hungary, Czechia, and Poland. And in Hungary, this labor migration trend has increased even more after the simplified naturalization procedure, which had been introduced in 2011, which let ethnic Hungarians to obtain dual citizenship easily, also allowing easy access to the Hungarian labor market. And we will see later on that Hungarian and Ukrainian dual citizens face additional barriers and complications when accessing their rights. And an additional status-related issue is the lack of proper documentation, which leaves around 10 to 20% of Roma in Ukraine stateless or undocumented. And these intersecting vulnerabilities place Roma refugees in a structurally disadvantaged position within EU and national protection frameworks during the current crisis. And throughout the last 2 years, there have been growing cases of marginalization from EU countries, as from Hungary, Poland, Czechia, Moldova, Romania, and Slovakia as well. Roma refugees from Ukraine basically face unmet needs at every stage of their displacement. Based on CSO's estimations, there are around 100,000 Roma refugees who fled to EU countries, but their invisibility and lack of precise data on their situation in refugee systems remains a problem. We don't know their actual number. At the borders, Roma are subjected to racial profiling, complications with dual citizenship, and lack of proper documentation leads also to delays and denials of entry. And once in host countries, Roma barely access private housing and live rather in overcrowded shelters, usually inadequate for long-term housing. In employment, Roma are pushed into informal, low-paid jobs with exploitative condition, and access to healthcare and education is also limited due to discrimination and systemic exclusion. And these patterns in their vulnerabilities all over the EU maintain the deep-rooted marginalization of Ukrainian Roma. Let me just have a sip of water. So let me dive into examining the regional and national frameworks and policy fields within which these experiences of Roma refugees took place. And first, I talk about the EU-level response. The Temporary Protection Directive, activated in March 2022, marked a historic shift in the EU's approach to displaced people. It was the first time the TPD was used since it was introduced in 2001, and it established a new unbureaucratic framework for the rapid reception of Ukrainian refugees. And under the TPD, refugees gain access to residence permits, housing, education, healthcare, and employment in the EU country of their choice, ensuring a broad spectrum of rights and protections. And as of now, more than 7 million people have fled from Ukraine, with about 5 million benefiting from the TPD and or similar national support measures. And although the TPD framework is seen as generous and inclusive, its implementation varies significantly across EU member states, depending on how resources are allocated and on the existing infrastructure of care in the specific hosting country. And apart from that, what raises crucial questions is that not all refugees from Ukraine fall equally under the scope of the TPD. This means that while the TPD offers broad protections in theory, it relies on assumptions that all refugees have a valid Ukrainian identity documents and a clear legal status and a clear Ukrainian citizenship, which is in fact not the case for many marginalized groups, undocumented and or stateless people in Ukraine. And as already stated, many Roma refugees hold a dual Hungarian Ukrainian citizenship, which means they hold EU citizenship, by default excluding them from the TP, and also many lack proper documentation, and these legal gaps have a profound impact on Roma refugees, subjecting them to exclusion at the borders and reducing their access to vital social services. And I argue that this dynamic reveals how EU refugee policies, even when framed as inclusive, can still reinforce existing hierarchies of race, nationality, and social status. So let's have a glance on Hungary's and Poland approaches to refugee protection. I apologize for this table. I know it's not very clear and simple and easy to read, but there was just too much information I had to fill in. So Hungary's and Poland approaches to refugee protection differ in certain aspects from each other, but in general, in both countries, the protection systems pose specific challenges to Roma refugees, further maintaining their marginalization. In Hungary, refugees have arrived in a protection system that has been demolished since 2012. It basically had no meaningful infrastructure of care and protection, and everything had to be set up from scratch. In Poland, the refugee system works with a more centralized, I would say better coordinated system, but it still leaves room for gaps in refugee protection, especially for marginalized groups. And one problem that appears in both countries is the lack of state-led data collection and monitoring mechanisms on refugees and their whereabouts, which makes it difficult to advocate for adequate and well-targeted policies. And also the number of Roma refugees in these countries remain quite unsure to this day. We only have CSO's estimations to rely on, which says in Hungary it's about 4,000 Roma refugees still residing in the country, while in Poland, where the whole refugee population is higher, the estimation is about 50,000 Roma refugees. And while both countries have set up a registration system for protection beneficiaries, claiming entitlements meant significant administrative and bureaucratic hurdles for refugees, adding up with the often racist and discriminative attitudes of authorities. And the further specificity about Hungary's response to the flee of Ukrainian refugees is that due to the exclusion of dual citizens from other European countries, the Hungarian state declared to cater for the needs of Hungarian Ukrainian dual citizens in a way that they are entitled to all the provision of temporary protection status holders, unless they receive more favorable benefits based on their Hungarian citizenship. But in practice, they often face additional complications when claiming their rights. And another concerning issue is that since they are not officially registered as temporary protection beneficiaries in the system, they just simply do not appear in any data on refugees. Regarding measures in housing, employment, welfare, and education, the two countries' approach do not differ in a sense, as both by and large remained universal in realizing assistance and care and have not established special rules to ensure equal treatment for vulnerable groups with regard to the most essential spheres of life. In fact, more and more restrictions are introduced across the EU. So, for instance, in housing, most Roma families only accessed collective housing in both countries, as already stated. And throughout the last 3 years, most of these families have lived in these shelters. And in the lack of any sort of centralized state action, there have been no meaningful way out of institutional housing for Roma refugees in neither of these countries. And this is already very concerning, and even more so that Hungary recently introduced the most restrictive measures in the region related to the housing of refugees with an ad hoc announcement from 21st of August 2024. Refugees are only entitled to subsidized accommodation if they have come from a territory of a so-called war-affected area, listed by the Hungarian government. And of course, Transcarpathia is just not considered to be a war-affected area by the Hungarian government. And in accordance with the government's narrative, the decree targets around 4,000 people who, quote unquote, were living in Hungary on state money without wanting to work, which might be understood clearly as an attack against the most vulnerable groups of refugees. Among them are disproportionately overrepresented the Roma. And Poland's government has also introduced stricter requirements and reduced support for temporary housing for Ukrainian refugees, and large reception centers where majorly Roma refugees reside are now closing down. And regarding further welfare assistance and financial measures. Roma refugees face accessibility problems due to inadequate information, complex and lengthy administrative procedures, and discriminatory attitudes of authorities. And another crucial concern about the financial allowances that they have been implemented on the basis of equality rather than equity, or are exclusively connected to family or employment status. And this means that in neither Hungary nor Poland are there meaningful state measures recognizing vulnerabilities. Without targeted equity-based measures that address these structural disadvantages, Roma are less able than other groups to benefit from the allowances for refugees, which they would be also entitled to. So let's move to employment. I already mentioned a few details on that. Crucial concern around employment is that although it is a good thing that men usually find work easily, they are extremely exposed to the risk of exploitative and illegal employment. And the state, none of the states establish safe employment initiatives. And of course, the kind of jobs that Roma refugee men access are essentially low prestige jobs that does not come with local knowledge or network, which would be essential for the social inclusion of refugee families in general. And regarding education, Hungary and Poland have taken distinct approaches. In Hungary, in theory, refugees are obliged to attend school within the national education system until the compulsory school age of 16. In contrast, Poland set up a dual pathway approach in which refugee children can either attend public schools or can continue online studies in the Ukrainian school systems. And in both countries, there have been experiences where there has been more resources for close attention, social work, mental and educational support, and that meant just more success for the Roma refugee youth in schools. But basically, neither of the Hungarian nor the Polish educational systems could address Roma refugees' specific needs systematically. And in the absence of comprehensive state-led initiatives and separate programs, Roma activists and CSOs have shouldered the responsibility for catering for the needs of Roma. In Poland, key contributors include the Center Council for Roma, the Foundation Toward Dialogue, and Roma community level activists working with agencies like Salam Lab, the IOM, Oxfam International, and UNHCR. And in Hungary, the Roma Veritas Foundation and various Roma community organizations were the most active in protecting Roma refugees and advocating for their needs. And these actors in both countries typically have received funding from international donors and CSOs, and they lack meaningful state support. And despite their valuable contributions, the required upskilling and sustainability of their efforts just exceeded their capacities, and the funding for their activities is gradually shrinking. So before I dive into my recommendations, I would like to close my presentation with just a few reflections on how we might want to think of Roma refugee situation. Because it is clear that under the framework of TP, Ukrainian refugees on an EU level are given rights and entitlements that were previously restricted or undesired in times of other crises for other groups of refugees. However, behind this welcoming framework of the EU response, marginalized groups, we can see that they still face inconsistent practices, discriminatory treatments, and additional challenges when accessing protection. And although the Hungarian and the former Polish government stand has long been questioned on its exclusionary politics against refugees and other marginalized groups, Roma refugees' marginalization in this humanitarian crisis tells a lot about the very European community as a whole. And in line with that, what I'm trying to highlight here is that the accounts of the unmet needs of Roma are not to be understood as extreme instances of vulnerability due to the out of ordinary nature of the current crisis, but instead expressions and reproductions of deep-seated historical processes of the racial marginalization of Roma and certain refugees on a European level. And I would like to close my presentation with my recommendations. I argue that to address these challenges, I propose the following recommendations. One of them, first and foremost, is that we need to widen the scope of EU asylum and protection policy frameworks, which would guarantee that no group basically is left behind. I also argue that welfare programs should be equity-based, as Roma refugees face unique barriers that require targeted support, particularly for housing. And instead of relying on temporary shelters, we should have long-term housing solutions with pathways to independent, affordable accommodations. Education support is also essential. Roma children must have access to public schools and digital tools for online education. Employment is another key area. Formal work pathways are needed to protect Roma from exploitation in informal jobs. And this requires also oversight and monitoring to ensure fair treatment. And finally, we must strengthen the role of civil society. Roma-led CSOs play a vital role in bridging gaps in state support, but they need funding and participation in policy making. And we also need better data collection to ensure Roma refugees are visible in refugee statistics. Without accurate data, it's just impossible to advocate for targeted support. And I argue that these measures might help to build a more inclusive and equitable refugee protection system.
Thank you very much, Lila, for this thoughtful presentation and for bringing this issue into the attention of a wider public. I think in itself this provides a lot of value. Before we go further into the discussion with our audience, who I again would like to encourage to share your thoughts and questions with us in the chat and the Q&A box, I would like to first give the floor for some initial reflections to our other panelists, Elżbieta and Dejan. Elżbieta, would you like to start to share your thoughts about Lila's work as well as the general situation from your perspective? You have also worked on the topic quite extensively.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to add to the presentation, Susanna, you make about me that, yes, I work for the Center of Migration Research, Warsaw University from 2016, actually, where we try to research migration of Polish Roma. I started working, researching migration of Polish Roma to UK, to Germany. And we did several projects, but from the beginning of the full-scale war, we are also focusing on situation of Ukrainian Roma. And to addition to this work, I'm also an activist. I run a small Roma NGO, Fundacja Jawdik. We are part of Ergo network. That's why I know Dejan very well, and probably we will discuss it, because few projects who are focused, who I did as a foundation, were founded by within the Ergo network and EPIM fund. And what I try to do in my job is to combine this experience I have as an activist, as someone who from the first day of full-scale war was engaged in helping of Ukrainian Roma. From the beginning of this year, in a research center I work, we conducting a project which is focused on Ukrainian Roma. It's about unequal citizenship and transnational mobilization of Polish, Czech, and Ukrainian Roma in the face of the war in Ukraine. And project is carried out by two mixed Romani and non-Romani research team, one Polish, one Czech, and Ukrainian, with the involvement of researchers from Czechia, Poland, Slovakia, and and Ukraine. So so this experience I have as a activist, we try to now use it for the research. And why we are also doing it, because since the beginning of the invasion, we have been dealing with the dominant discourse, especially in Poland, but probably it's also in other countries. As we were hearing about the Polish aid, it was very visible that this aid was homogenizing, erasing contributions of minorities, especially those whose Polishness was questioned, and it includes Roma as well. Why this is problematic? So I could say that I could point a few reasons that are important, but from my perspective, what we see is how methodological nationalism manifests itself. So it homogenizes narratives about aid, arises, as I said, minority contributions, diminishes the agency of those who help, and we were witness of huge mobilization of Vietnamese, of Pentecostal Church, of Jehovah's Witness, of Roma, of Jews, of Ukrainians, of Lemkos, and so on. I mean, all minorities, LGBTIQ, I mean, all were involved. And when we read about the reports, they are not there. So in this research, we focus on minorities because this is very important to admit this, to give the agency of everyone who was supporting. Regarding the situation of Roma, Lila present. I listened this presentation with a great interest, and of course I read the extensive text early on. Lila, you describe and in very impressive detail the situation and the challenges faced by Ukrainian Roma refugees in Poland and in Hungary. Also, how the system works, or maybe doesn't work. Of course, it's important to remember that the situation is very dynamic. It was very different at the beginning. It was very different 1 year ago, and now, almost 3 years after, it's totally, I would say, totally different. When you see the numbers, when you see how the facilities, how the shelters are working, how many volunteers we have, what kind of policies are in place. I would suggest maybe also I would try to discuss what I read, what could be maybe improve, or what I would also put. It's also part of my work to maybe to go deeper into case studies, like including specific case studies and testimonials from Roma refugees in my work. For example, at the beginning, it was delivering humanitarian supplies, like different things, managing shelters, like helping them to enter, to negotiate. We were helping with papers and so on, but at the same time, we were listening to them. We were listening what kind of experience they have, what kind of history is behind of this experience. This could help us to illustrate the diversity of experience within the Roma community. It is very important to also to gather the experience of not only organizations, civil society organization, but different type of organization, like religious organization, evangelical churches in Europe, but especially in Ukraine. I've been visiting Roma in Ukraine several times, and most of them are part of religious group and supported by them. We must not forget about Roma soldiers who have been fighting at the front since the beginning of the war. Many of them and the families we have met have been fighting in the front from 2014. In 2023, I made a documentary film with some interviews with Roma women from Ukraine who were in Poland. Some of them are still here. And one of them is mother of two sons, soldiers who are fighting in the war. And one of the sons is fighting from 2014. So it's very important to show this part of the experience Roma have, that they are not just, escaping like everybody else, but many of them are in Ukraine, and they try to support the IDPs. I mean, the people who fled from the east part to west part, and the young men are fighting, and we should also bear in mind that this kind of experience could help us in the future to build narratives, to include Roma voice into history of Ukrainians during the war, as we have experienced from the Second World War and the war in the former Yugoslavia, that we miss these voices, we miss these histories, we miss these testimonies. So it's very important to focus on testimonies, on a story Ukrainian Roma have to say. What I would also suggest that we as Roma activists, but also as researchers, we could benefit from a more nuanced discussions of the regional differences within Ukraine and the host countries, highlighting how the experience of Roma refugees may vary based on the geographic location, local policies, community support provided. We need more comprehensive understanding. As I said, I was few times actually in the western Ukraine, in Mukachevo, in Uzhhorod, and the situation is really difficult and very, like, for example, I was in Mukachevo, and there was a huge community, 50,000 people who spoke only Hungarian, and 30 kilometers away there is also big community, and they spoke dialects of Carpathian Roma. So and their needs were different. The way of life was different. Both of them, they were hosting Roma from the east part, and they try to help them. So we need to take it into consideration, this diversity needs and aid they need. I would also consider and discuss these long-term integration strategies beyond humanitarian ad hoc immediate aid. This is not the moment for this. We need really pathways to gain the citizenship, to access to the papers, access to the education, employment opportunities, and promote self-sufficiency of Ukrainian Roma families, refugees, because it's a real problem, I would say. Like we have, I mean, Lila pointed out that we don't have exact data because ethnically, we cannot collect this kind of data. More or less, as activists and as a Roma leaders, organization, more or less, we know how many of them, of Roma, are still for example, in Poland, but still this is not seen as a proper information for the government. This is difficult to discuss with the local or regional authorities, because they always say that Roma refugees are treated in the same way as other refugees, and they have access to everything as the others. Anyhow, we should work on the long-term integration strategies, not just give the humanitarian aid, because it doesn't make sense, and people live in a kind of the limbo, so they don't know what to do. They don't know what the future will be. And the last thing I would point out is we should really think about how to address the mental health and challenges faced in this matter faced by Roma refugees, particularly those who have experienced trauma due to the war, and it's not just the trauma regarding the war. It's years of marginalization, exclusions, and anti-Gypsyism. So we need recommendation for mental health support services tailored to the needs of Roma. It will be very difficult because, as I think we all know, that the mental health it's taboo, especially within Roma community. But the needs, this kind of needs for this woman, for kids, for children, is it's something which is really necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Elżbieta, for pointing out some of these really crucial factors that play into the situation and entry points where we should focus responses to. I think especially your last 2 points about need for a long-term strategy and what exactly mental health support would need to address and need to deal with really underpins what Lila previously mentioned, that this is not necessarily the extremeness of the crisis that poses such challenges to the Roma community, but it kind of amplifies and exacerbates those deep-rooted, deep-seated historical experiences of marginalization that now come to the fore in a much more precarious situation. So we need to tackle, in the case of such communities, much more complex, problematic, and not just focus on what anyhow, unfortunately, the war has brought. Before giving the floor back to Lila, I would move now to Dejan and ask for your input, your views. You have been working also specifically on the Ukrainian context. How do you see the situation? How do you see, maybe if you can touch on that, some of those differences regional within Ukraine that Elżbieta already hinted at?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm happy that you address these issues and these very important topics. Today, I have cooperation with Lila and with Ella since the war was started in Ukraine. Lila and Ella, Elżbieta was our local monitor, and they contribute to ergo synthesis report. Ella was provided her contribution to the country-specific report on Hungary, and Ella was provide her contributions to country-specific report on the Poland. I'm coming from the Ergo Network. Ergo Network is the network of grassroots Roma organization across the Europe. We have 32 members in the 27 European states. We also have a member in the Ukraine. So our focus since the occupation, Russian occupation of Ukraine was started, our focus was moved to immediately support to the Ukrainian Roma refugee, but as well Roma who were in Ukraine, especially those who got the status of IDPs, internally displaced person, the person who moved from affected region to the, let's say, so-called a little bit secure the regions, and we will manage the programs supported by the European Program of Integration and Migrations, and we provide immediately support to our members in the Central and Eastern Europe. We are focusing on providing the essential assistance, including access to the legal aid, education, housing, and healthcare support to the Ukrainian Roma refugees. So we provide the grants for the Grassroots Roma organization in Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, and Moldova. That was the most the country who was most affected by this situation of Ukrainian Roma refugees. As Ella already mentions, situation has changed now. We are in third years of this situation that still we have the Ukrainian Roma refugees and war is still going on in Ukraine. So, for example, Slovakia and Romania become the transit countries. Still, we have Ukrainian Roma refugees in this country, but not the number it was in the beginning. So now the focus is also coming to the West European country, mainly to the Germany, Benelux country, and Scandinavian countries. But we as Ergo, we continue to work in the 4 Central and East European country, in Hungary, Moldova, Czech Republic, and Poland. This is our focus now. This year was on this 4 country. So last year in December, exactly, we provide this synthesis report for these 6 countries, which I already mentioned: Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, Moldova, and Poland. This year, months ago, we organized the conference related to the situation of Ukrainian Roma refugees, when we had the chance to open the platform together with international organization, EU officials, and state authorities, and local Roma civil society organization. Ella and Lila already spoke about a lot of challenges which is face Ukrainian Roma refugees, but also I will repeat that what is now most important, this is the access to the services, especially access to the housing and accommodation of Ukrainian Roma refugee, then access to the healthcare system, access to the social benefit system, and access to the education. Especially, we have a problem with the education system that a lot of Roma children are not in situation. I'm talking now about Central and East European country. They are not in a situation that they can continue their education. Usually, if they are enrolled in the education system are not provided in their Ukrainian language, which they listened to education before the war. Also, the capacity for the follow online education is limited when it comes to the Roma family without basic access to the internet service and all those equipment which is necessary to follow online education. But time to time, also the online education are stopped because the war situations and the rockets of the certain region. The other problem, which I think Lila and Ella also mentioned, is the access to this temporary protection. actually how the temporary protection system are actually good. I mean, it's actually the good paper, let's say, but when it's come to the policy paper and all of the countries was adopted these guidelines, European guidelines for the temporary protection. But when it's come to the implementation, we see that lot of challenges. Especially, I will mention now Moldova, that we still have undocumented Ukrainian Roma refugees who cannot improve their legal status, and automatically they cannot obtain the temporary protection status in the Moldova. Mostly those people are coming from the Odessa regions. What we also follow is the Ukraine now become the candidate country to the European Union, and they are in the process of EU integrations. And now is the moment when the Ukrainian government opened several chapters. One of the chapters who are first to be open is the chapter 23. An integral part of this chapter is the Roma inclusion strategy, and following the action plan from the implementation of the Roma inclusion strategy, Ukrainian government adopted the strategy, and they also adopt action plan for the 4 years implementation of the strategy. We also following the implementation of and monitoring the implementation of the strategy through our members in Ukraine. Also, what is missing is missing this platform from the civil society, which they can contribute to the implementation of the action plan. Also, what is Ella mentions, I also would like to reflect it, is that anti-Gypsyism is the one of the let's say core problem which Ukrainian Roma face it. Especially, this is the root cause of the discrimination in all fields of the social economic aspects of their life. So, for example, access to the labor market. We have just a limited number of the Roma refugees who have open access to the labor market, and there is no certain program or projects related to support these groups, especially when it comes to the vocational education trainings and the different type of the skills training, which lead them to be on the labor market. One of the topics which I also would like to touch is the recovery plan of Ukraine. Ergo Network, together with the Central Council of the German Sinti and Roma, are in the, let's say, following the process of the recovery plan for Ukraine. Having in mind that it's very important initiatives with the certain financial instruments, it is necessary to don't repeat the mistake from the Western Balkan, when the Roma was not a part of the recovery plans. I have to mention that we are now, let's say, pushing or advocating for that Ukrainian Roma should be the part of the recovery process, especially when it's come to the reconstruction of the housing, when it's coming to the access to the labor market and access to the essential services. Of course, anti-discrimination measure is also very important. I also want to say that I agree with Ella that we have a different situation than we have 3 years ago. We have less voluntaries at supporting the refugee in the field, but also we have the less international work of the international organization, but also less financial instruments who can directly provide the support to the refugee. But also, I also must say that we also, during our monitoring missions, we also have a chance to talk to governments of the country who host the refugees, regional government, but also local authorities, and the enthusiasm of this of the authorities less and less than it was when the war was started. And I think that we should continue to address these topics because the people are still facing the almost same problem, but even the worse situation is even the worse than it was in the beginning of the when war was actually was started. What I also want to mention is that the role of the civil society organization supporting the not only refugee but also role of the civil society in Ukraine supporting the Ukrainian Roma. You already mentioned the Ukrainian Roma is not it's actually diverse group. Is have several groups and several speaking groups of the Roma in Ukraine, but almost all of them are facing the anti-Gypsyism. This phenomena of the anti-Gypsyism and the access to the essential services. I think one of the crucial points should be to the organized community there, to we have the equal participation of the Roma civil society together with mainstream civil society in all EU integration process which Ukraine are now taking the very active role in this field that they should become the EU member state. So at the moment, this is from my side. Maybe I missed something, but maybe during discussion I can also contribute. And I also want to say thank you to the Lila for very good presentation. Lila is really expert when it's come to and she also very support Ergo Network during our advocacy and during our discussions for the implementation of the temporary protection documents with DJ Home.
Thank you very much, Dejan. In the meantime, Ella also shared some of her research related to the topic. And Dejan, please, if you would like to share some of your work, do so. I will make sure that these also appear later in the show notes under the video that is uploaded. Lila, would you like to briefly react to Ella and Dejan before we move into the Q&A?
Yeah, I would like to. So thank you for all of your points. All of your points are well taken. I would just like to pick up on two of your thoughts, which basically highlighted the biggest challenges with this paper and this research for me throughout this process. You mentioned, Ella, you mentioned the narratives and the importance of lived experiences. And I'm coming from a background, more of an ethnographic background, where I put really a huge emphasis on lived experiences and how to connect them with structural dynamics in relations. And it was a huge challenge for me in this paper to rather focus on the structural level of policies. So this was just something that I had to try out as an expert, also coming from a more qualitative and more ethnographer mindset. But I also think that the way to think about marginalized groups in every in any setting is to connect their experiences and their narratives and their voices with the more structural level forces and the context that their experiences are embedded to. And the other one, another challenge was that the situation is very dynamic. Yes, that was the case with me. Basically, with these new restrictions introduced in the last couple of months, new experiences emerged on the ground, and it was a huge challenge to incorporate all this and to make sense out of it and how to pose recommendations. And that was really, so when I wrote my recommendations, it was really a wishful thinking from my side, because at the moment I wrote them, I knew that I'm writing these recommendations, but the situation is basically just more and more distant from these recommendations, and the situation is changing for the worse. So I agree with your points, and anything else? Yes, mental health. Yeah, that was also really important. And I recently collected interviews with Roma refugees, more unstructured and more narrative interviews, and it was. Unfortunately, I could not incorporate that data into my research because that was already finished, but it was just really informative to hear these complex realities on the ground and to hear the importance of their past experiences of trauma and how that influences their path here in Hungary. I think we should never neglect that part when we think about Roma refugees. Now this is all that I wanted to react to their points.
Thank you very much, Lila. I would actually maybe stay with the point of individual stories and experiences a little bit. And obviously there's a lot more that you did that can fit into the paper. And you yourself mentioned that you have conducted a ton of interviews. Roma Versitas have conducted a lot of interviews, so there is information. I wanted to ask you more about these experiences. So when we are talking about Roma refugees, when in general comparing to non-Roma refugees fleeing Ukraine, how do you see the composition of the group differ, both in standard like socio-economic, demographic characteristics, but also in potential awareness about the support that may be available, and in terms of people's outlook. How do they relate to their situation? Or what are their expectations, and would they want to try to settle in the countries where they arrive to, where they no doubt, knowing Central and Eastern Europe will also face a lot of discrimination. How do they approach the situation? If you can maybe give a little bit more detail on that, and then I would dive further into some of the questions we have received and the policy responses.
So thank you for this question, because I think it's really interesting to see how people's narratives that you think of in a certain way from another level, and you might think of something that you call marginalization, and how that people narrate that experience might differ so much from the concept of marginalization. So I'm really interested and fascinated by these contradictions in how we think of people's experiences and how they actually experience and narrate their lives. And I many times found myself in a situation with a Roma refugee when we were talking, and how they talked about the Hungarian state grandiose support, and they often were very positive about how they get this support. And if you put this together, of course, with the transgenerational experience of segregation and their experience in Ukraine, where they are considered to be not even full citizens, and they're not recognized in any social arena, of course, getting any sort of help might be perceived as only in a positive manner. So that is one thing that I would like to highlight, which was really interesting in these accounts of Roma refugees. And of course, I haven't conducted interviews with non-Roma refugees, so I only know Roma refugees. and only from the Transcarpathian region. So about their socioeconomic status, we can say that maybe I already told this in my presentation, that the Transcarpathian region is the most deprived economic region of Ukraine. Not only Roma refugees live in poverty in that region, but it's just there's a general lack of meaningful infrastructure and meaningful employment opportunities, etc. So these people from generations to generations lived under a situation which is extremely segregated and extremely dependent on unstable economic opportunities of migrating and informal and making ends meet by informal economic activities. And then, of course, in every marginalized groups, there are people who are just better at narrating their lives. And this is also something that was very interesting recently, that many people from these marginalized backgrounds are just not used to narrating their lives. They don't really talk much because they never asked to talk about their lives. And then there were just a couple of unique settings where I could talk to people from the same community, but somehow they had, I don't know, accidentally better access to all sorts of capital through which they could make a better economic position for themselves. But these are very, very incidental, I would say. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you, Lily.
Yes, can I, you were asking, I think I would like to share the experience I have about the composition of the Roma group, how they were perceived, especially at the beginning, but still it's the situation is like when Roma needs help, usually there are big groups. So I was actually asked by ERIAC, European Roma Arts and Culture Institute, to go to. It was just after I think it was 2 weeks after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and few kind of research team were sent to the border, and I was responsible to form kind of a research team group to go to the border to monitor the situation, to check how is there, what kind of need Roma have, and so on, just to collect testimonies and so on. So we went there with me, my colleague Romni, who spoke few dialects of Roma, my colleague who was Ukrainian speaking and Russian speaking. You know, we wanted to be able to communicate because we didn't know what kind of also language needs Roma will have. So we visited reception centers on the border, and the place where the reception center was located, it was in Korczowa Nowa, I don't remember. Yeah, but it was in Korczowa, very close to Medyka, very close to Przemyśl. And the place where the reception center was located used to be a large shopping center. The alleys and different parts had street names. This place was to be there, you know, for refugees to be there 1 or 2 days the most, and Roma stayed there much longer in large groups, thousand or several dozen of people, family bound, gathering in large groups. This is very important to know that gathering in large groups for Roma is natural, especially when there is women, old women, children. They feel just, you know, safe. We observed the same thing in the migration of Polish Roma to UK. So they were there. No one offered them anything transportation, accommodation. They were people coming with the cars, with the buses, but when they saw that they are Roma, they said, Cyganie, no, we are not taking them. Gypsies, we are not taking them. So we were there. We were visited these places. We were looking for them to speak with them. And one of the guard, when we asked them if we know where the Roma families are here, he said, oh, they are there, but be careful because it's Gypsy district. So, I mean, you can imagine like what, I mean, it was pure anti-Gypsyism for me, these words came from the guard who spoke to us, and he was even laughing, like he was telling us a good joke, So this is really evidence of anti-Gypsyism, very symptomatic, and on this kind of situation where we encounter more often. But I wanted to share with you because it's. I mean, I will remember it forever. I don't look like Roma. My colleagues, they don't also look like Roma, but yeah, this is the way the people judge.
Yeah, I just
Thank you very much for sharing.
will quickly add to that because it reminded me of some experience I had with a Hungarian newspaper. They asked me for an interview about Roma refugees, and when they sent me the unedited version, I was very surprised to see how my narrative about Roma refugees experiences they translated into a very, very racist tone. It was an independent system critical newspaper, right? Wrote by intellectuals, and they mentioned in the paper in the article that these people, Roma refugees from Transcarpathia, have a different perception of the human race, and they are culturally different, so much different, and how different they are, and how distant they are from our society. That's what they wanted to highlight out from what I told them. And I think it's incredible how much this whole mindset is woven into our society we don't even recognize.
If I can add something, yeah. So for my experience during the monitoring visits to these all Central and East European countries, when we monitoring the situation of Ukrainian Roma refugees, we saw that there is a second class of the refugees. The Roma are second class of the refugees.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I have personal experience because I'm coming from the Western Balkan region, and I saw back in my mind like 25 years ago, when was the war in former Yugoslavia, and when was the refugee as well. But there was this same behavior against the Roma refugees at that time, and same what I see now against the Roma refugees. For example, I give you an example in Slovakia, and the border to Ukraine, there were camps, and the camp was split on the two parts. One better part was only for the white refugees, and the other part, which is no any kind of conditions. There was only the tents. Even there was not any water supply there. So there was no electricity. There was nothing there except two mobile toilets. Roma was pushed on this part, and there was even forbid to mix, and children can play together with other refugees from the other camp, which was like only the tents was in the between. And what I was surprised, there was the profiling by the humanitarian workers who was managed the camp together with the local authorities, and they immediately profile you. If you are a little bit black, you go to the right side. If you are white, you go to the left side. So that's something which I was really, really really back 25 years ago in the Western Balkan, there was also this kind of segregation with under the people who are refugees, for the refugees that escaped from the countries. So yeah, unfortunately, we have situation now as well. But I think Salila is what is also very important, and Ella was mentioned, and Zuzane. I think these personal stories is very important, and they give us really they describe the really situation on the ground. So I think we should also focus on this personal narratives of the people who face it difficulty in their refugee life.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think from all these accounts, the process of discrimination and segregation is clearly, unfortunately, part of the policy response, it seems. I would like to move on a little bit to pick up some of the questions that we have received. And one still concerns the demographics, if you will, of the refugees. Lila, in your presentation, you mentioned the particular situation of those who have dual citizenship, and you specifically focused on those Roma refugees who have dual Hungarian, Ukrainian citizenship. To what extent are you aware of similar situations of Ukrainian Roma with other citizenship? The question goes whether it really is exclusively a Hungarian thing, and whether you know of instances of Roma with Hungarian citizenship who, for example, from Poland were sent to Hungary because there seems to be anecdotal evidence, at least, of Ukrainian Roma with Hungarian citizenship sent to Hungary from the Czech Republic, which again wouldn't exactly be a process in line with asylum regulations. So if you are aware of how this plays out in other relations.
Okay, so thank you for this question. This is a totally a Hungarian specific thing, because as I mentioned, in 2011, the Hungarian state introduced this simplified procedure for naturalization, which means that Hungarians living abroad, ethnic Hungarians living abroad, can obtain Hungarian citizenship, dual citizenship, easily. So this means that there is no other groups in Ukraine holding any sorts of dual citizenships from other countries. It's only Hungarian, Ukrainian citizens who have dual citizenship. And this means that they have also EU citizenship, which means that they are by default excluded from the temporary protection framework. And from the very beginning of the war, it already posed huge obstacles for Roma, because many Roma from the Transcarpathian region who are of ethnic Hungarian origin went through this simplification procedure in order to obtain citizenship, because it's easier to get jobs in Hungary and to stay Hungary for longer times to work. So many of the men, Hungarian speaking Roma men from the Transcarpathian region, and women as well, but mainly men, hold a dual citizenship. So it became a big breeding ground for racial profiling at the beginning of the war, because, of course, Roma refugees were did not know if they cannot go to other countries other than Hungary, and Hungary were also so in Hungary, it was not from the very beginning that they could be recognized easily. There were, I think in March, they introduced like officially this legislation that they accept Hungarian citizens as well, or these dual citizens as well. And in Czechia and in Poland, and I also met personally with Roma refugees 2 weeks ago, holding dual citizenships, who went first to Poland or went first to Czechia, and they were sent away. And there was one example, and in the name of lived experiences and narratives, I will tell you this example because it's really telling how much this affects really the histories of these people. There were one person who were kicked out of the accommodation due to these new restrictions, and he was from the Transcarpathian region. He held dual citizenship. He was basically kicked out of the shelter where he stayed. After August, he was kicked out, and then he went to Poland to work, but he could only go there illegally, basically, because he had dual citizenship. He would not be recognized by the Temporary Protection framework at all. So he could not access any sort of services, and he got really sick, but it was only like an ear infection that he got, but he eventually died because he could not get any sort of medical assistance. And he was 23 years old, having a family. So these experiences happen on the ground still today due to these policy gaps.
Thank you for sharing that, Lena. This is really tragic.
Yeah.
We are virtually approaching the end of our time, but I want to touch on what I believe is an important aspect. You have mentioned that there are obviously big policy gaps, and the Roma refugees are really falling through across these cracks. And a lot has changed over the nearly 3 years. The situation is dynamically evolving, but there is also an increasing wariness with dealing with asylum seekers, refugees, maintaining the initial enthusiasm, if you will, or sympathy, helpness, or helpfulness into what comes to nearly 3 years now. I wanted to ask you, though, how do you see allyship evolving? You mentioned the role of international organizations, CSOs, supporting Roma refugees. How are alliances forming around the issue? Obviously, there are Roma organizations trying to thematize the topic, but you mentioned that receptiveness has not been particularly high. Ella mentioned the Polish example. What about international institutions, organizations, the European Union, or in our question or Q&A section, we have received a question regarding the role of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, specifically the contact point on Roma and Sinti issues. Are such actors stepping in? Is there any support that they can provide, and how is this evolving? How are organizations like the ERGO Network and similar civic initiatives can reach out and build partnership with such organizations? Could they help to change the policy response?
So one of my answers is that this whole crisis situation with Roma refugees really provided the opportunity on a national level, at least in Hungary, because now I'm talking about my own experiences, but really provided the opportunity for CSOs, Roma and non-Roma CSOs, to work together and collaborate and build a more sustainable solidarity network. And I think its roots became realized in these last 3 years. However, it's really a challenge now that donors are stepping out of the situation. And the other answer is related to this last thought. It's only from the international Roma organizations, it's only the ERGO network who supported our work. I don't know about any other who stepped in with financial resources or any sort of capacity building or anything, or any meaningful activities, maybe in advocacy, maybe in symbolic recognition, yes, or knowledge production activities, but not directly supporting the work of the stakeholders. And then the last thought is that yes, there are the big donor organizations of EU and UNHCR and these international organizations. They provided, of course, the major part of the resources, but they are also stepping out, as far as I know.
If I just add very shortly,
Yeah.
so what we need is actually specific program approach to the Roma communities, both refugees and Roma community in Ukraine. There is no, under the international organization, there is no specific program focusing on the Roma. And it was not clear what actually international organization doing in the field related to the supporting the Roma in Ukraine, but as well Ukrainian Roma refugee. On the beginning of the war, we see when it comes to the refugee, there were certain programs related to the mainly humanitarian support and some legal aid support. But this was only on the beginning. So at the moment, there is in certain countries such as Moldova, we see in Hungary, in Thailand, there was some certain housing support. In Poland, mainly we see the very good engagement of the city of Krakow, for example, supporting the Ukrainian Roma refugees. And but we missing this program approach related to the support of Ukrainian Roma in general. That's something which we need to advocate together, because there is really open space and a lot of possibility to for the supporting these people who are, let me say, who are in urgent need for support.
Anna, would you like to add anything?
I mean, I agree with what was said by Lila and Dejan. So unfortunately, I also don't hear like common voice on different international Roma organization about the Ukrainian Roma refugees. At the beginning, it was really, the voice was heard, but now it's more, less and less interest from maybe because of there is less and less interest from donors, big donors such as UNHCR, IOM, Oxfam, UNICEF, and also national government. We were taking part, I think it was at the beginning of October, there was a conference organized in Kyiv by ARCA, supported by German government, Sinti and Roma, Central Council of Roma and Sinti in Germany. So they organized a conference in Kyiv to draw attention of the situation of Ukrainian Roma in the European countries and also in Ukraine. And the conclusion after this conference was that like I would say not optimistic for us, for Roma. We are not high in the agenda, in the agenda, and it's we need to take into consideration that the general situation in Europe, in the world, has, of course, influence. It influences also, like, there are different more important issues, and Roma issues usually are always, you know, not high on the agenda. So it's I think it's our responsibility as activists, as leaders, as the researchers to, you know, to draw attention, to advocate, to, you know, to monitor the situation, to deliver the data, and to, you know, to somehow improve the situation. But generally, there is in Poland also we feel this solidarity fatigue. You know, like people are more and more tired of helping the others. You know, so it's like general. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to explain it, but we are tired of the situation, and we are tired. What to say about Ukrainians? They are even more tired.
Yes, I think that's unfortunately a general experience and trend by now, that there is this general fatigue, whether it's generally about the war or about refugees as such, and it's very hard to keep the topic on the table and people engaged and committed in support. And that is why I think the work that all three of you are doing is extremely important, and I'm very grateful that we could discuss it today, and that you shared your knowledge, your experience, and your work with us, as well as the resources that you have put into the chat. I have taken note, and we will also share it with the video online. So once again, I would like to thank you for being here with us. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time. So we need to conclude the discussion for today, but I'm sure that all three of you will make sure that the topic remains on the table. What I realized we didn't say in the beginning, but I think we should not miss out on that although Lila's fellowship with us at the German Marshall Fund has come to an end, she continues to be engaged with the topic and work as an analyst. So Lila, if you would maybe just quickly point out where those interested can find you in the future. Where are your next engagements or current engagements?
Well, currently I work at the Center for Social Sciences at the Institute for Sociology, and it's a critical pedagogical project on Roma communities and marginalized communities, but Hungarian communities. That is
this is in Budapest.
This is
in Poland.
Yes. And then I have all sorts of side projects. There's also an upcoming issue that I'm coordinating at the Journal of Fordulat. It's also on Roma communities in the Central Eastern European region, and it's basically collecting ethnographies and focusing on lived experiences and putting it in a very structural analysis. And I still work at the Roma Veritas Foundation, but just as a consultant right now. So you can find me in a lot of places.
Yeah, and I would encourage everybody to do just that, because Lila's work is definitely worth following, and we are very happy that we could support this project over the past year. We will share the paper online. In the chat I already put the link, but it will be circulated. Once again, I would like to thank our excellent speakers for being here with us today and sharing all your knowledge. And I would also like to thank our audience for sticking with us through this hour and a half. If you are interested in our work, please follow the Engaging Central Europe program of the German Marshall Fund on Facebook and X, as well as the work of the German Marshall Fund, which you can find on all major social media platforms. Thank you for staying here with us today, and have a nice evening and day ahead, depending on where you are.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.